Hello, everybody, and thank you, Vera, for this nice introduction. Before I start, I want to mention something which is that I'm really grateful for this venue here today because I've been thinking about this topic for, let's say, the last 7 years, and I think this is the perfect place to talk about it. Two disclaimers. One, I might say things that some of you might feel offended. So everything I'm going to say is not to say that dictionaries or more, let's say, conventional products of language documentation are bad. They are great. But what I want to convey is that sometimes communities might need something else or something in addition to that. So please don't take any offense by what I'm going to say. And the second thing I wanted to say is it's a pretty personal account, so some of the things I'm going to say speak really to this particular experience with the DOE community and might not be applicable for some communities where you're working. So please keep that in mind. Before I start, I would just like to thank, of course, the DOE and the other people for their collaboration and friendship over the last years, funding agencies, my really nice colleagues, and funding I already mentioned. So to start with, you probably all know this, and this is also one of the reasons why we are all here today, is that our community has been more and more concerned about leveling out kind of asymmetries that we have between the goals of a researcher and the communities. So we're kind of taught or told to design projects that kind of are designed with the involvement through all parties, and we are also kind of asked to work in collaborative frameworks, which we all know is difficult, and there's many different definitions of collaborations out there. So, however, kind of these demands, as scholars have observed, and as you probably also observe from time to time, are not that much reflected in our field. So the question is why is that? And I have some thoughts on that. So one is, of course, the combination of very concrete goals that come from academia with the ones from the communities that are very often less concrete or more variable is kind of hard. Another point is sometimes we lack a clear idea on what the community actually wants, and I think this is not so hard to understand because it's hard to speak about our own needs or really to know what do we actually want out of this, right? So to get to this point and understand how these needs are communicated in a community can take time. Another point, and I think all of us experience this, there's of course external pressures from institutions and funding agencies. So we are asked to, of course, answer big questions in linguistics, which is difficult, and it leaves us actually very little room for subjective goals. And finally, of course, and it comes together, we have a general lack of time and kind of a feeling of overwhelm with all these different demands coming together. So the question is this actually a mission impossible? So is it true that it has to be so difficult to kind of combine the researchers and the community's goals? And building on that, the question is how can we reach objective and subjective research goals by doing a documentation project that also considers a larger social and cultural political context. So what I'm going to do today is I want to share an account of how the seemingly diverse agendas of the communities I've been working with and my own agenda kind of can grow together, and share some of the benefits and the drawbacks of this approach. So I already have given you a little introduction. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the DOE people language and a little bit of the ethnohistory for the project background. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the trajectory of describing the grammar of space, which was my dissertation topic, and how we got from this to the construction of a new village. And then some reflections. So just a really brief background for those of you who are not familiar with the region. So I'm working with the DOE people that you can see here. It's a language from the very small Nadahoop family spoken in northwestern Amazonia in Brazil. They're in the corner to Colombia and Venezuela. The DOE people nowadays, though is the smallest member of the family, we only have 160 speakers that live in this community. Oh, you can't see my here. They live here in a single community. However, in the past, they actually inhabited this region with their sister, shared with their sister language, and have kind of undergone a migration to this region here. And this is an important point and what actually has triggered this whole project history. So just to give you a little more background, as I said, the Dao people shared this region here and then migrated through the Kurikuri River, where they later on kind of engaged in an extractivist system, and the population got reduced to only 54 speakers in the 80s, what led missionaries to kind of bring them all together in the single Valois community where they are living now. So this whole territory has now been inhabited by the Dao people for a really long time. So what you can see here is kind of a trajectory of the projects I have been involved with the community. And if we go from left to the right, we can see that the left, where I started, was really a project. I was focusing on my dissertation work, and where we are now ending up is a project that is completely led, driven, and administered by national territory. So what I'm going to do now is benefits, goals / outcomes for me on the lower end and for the communities, and kind of see how we move on, how we moved along all these years. So as I said, starting out working on the grammar of space, of course, clearly my goals were, of course, academic production, archival collection, and writing a PhD thesis. For the Dao people, that meant, okay, they acquired some documentation skills, they started to work on a computer, they started to learn how to work on recording equipment and so on, and also had a stable income. One idea while we were doing that actually came from the community was like, oh, actually we would like to record a little bit stories of our elders because they are dying. And what we were doing is recording biographies that ended up in kind of nice storybooks and videos that Dao people are now still using. For me, it was interesting because it expanded actually the analysis of the language of space, because we had like a vast inventory of place names and landscape terms, motion events, and so on. Just to give you a little example here, translated into English. So when we were transcribing these, I kept asking speakers about all these place names that were showing up. And all of a sudden conversations started about like, where are these places? Do you know where this is? Oh, no, I don't know where that is. Maybe that person knows where that is. So kind of that conversation about their traditional territory and people not really knowing where that was became stronger and stronger and stronger. So in 2017, we actually got together, we formed a little grant team and started to write a grant on the documentation of kind of a domain-driven documentation project on territory, landscape, and memory, which was funded by the Museu do Índio in Brazil and UNESCO. And what we were doing, we would kind of do a lot of journeys through their traditional territory on foot and by boat, and record all of that in audiovisual and with a GPS. So as a result, we would start doing create maps that the community is still using for territory protection, and it's a really impressive. It sounds like something small, but it's actually a very powerful tool when they are in discussions with local authorities on land rights and so on. And what we also did during these 700 kilometers of paths that we walked through, we cleared a lot of paths that people are now using for subsistence activities and forest management activities. For me, I really benefited actually from this project because I could use a novel methodology of on-site data collection. So it means like when people were telling narratives, we could record certain parts of the narratives at the place where they have been spoken, which yields really interesting data. And of course, I could expand my collection of landscape terms. So here's just a little, some pictures on what we documented. So for example, here we were clearing a path, hunting activities. On the top right corner is, for example, the moment when we were discovering or rediscovering an ancient house site of the Dao people. Here's just a little recording of Seu Jair, kind of doing a free recall task, telling us what we were, where we are going through.
Puis do yum do yum do he wad nak de do boy ho nak de khub me nak de khub me boy de shu.
Okay, so all these points that Jair mentioned are kind of we kind of put on these maps. This is one of the maps that people use for that I just mentioned that people use in discussions on land rights nowadays. For me, so we have all these maps, but what brought us, if you think about, of course, the goals that I had, right, which is advancing also the description of the language of space. What all these recordings brought for me, for example, was a really interesting inventory of motion verbs. No, I'm not going to talk about data, but just to give you an example that this is worth, because there are some surprises that we sometimes do not think of that can come with these collections. For example, we have here a set of motion verbs that's really interesting, described as typologically uncommon because we have the conflation of motion, have, and ground in the verb group that we all know it's not that common, but those are verbs that surfaced while we were on these walks and that in the community probably would not have appeared to me. It can reveal culturally and environmentally salient features and also represents kind of the idea of mobility of the Dao people in their own terms. While we were on these walks, and actually the place where Jair was sitting is one of the places we always stop by, and people said, in the past we actually lived here, like families in certain periods of time lived at this particular place, and actually we would like to spend more time here, but how do we do that? So the Dao people had kind of the idea of building a house or clearing making a clearing and building a manure garden as a way of occupying land, and that's what they did. But for that we needed, of course, money, and those are projects that are not funded by, of course, ELDP, for example. So we were looking for national funding for constructing a village. So again, the grant team got together and we were writing this grant, and which got awarded, and we started to build actually this village, this new little village. So this provided us with resources, construction of this, what they call situ billing, and also by that really continuous interaction with their ancestral land. So there's not a week passing where the Dao people are not sending me a message, oh, we are going to Situ Beleng, we're staying there for 2 weeks or something like this. So it's really a place that people frequently go to, which is, I think, a really beautiful outcome. For me, something that was surprising, something that I would not actually tell those speakers to do, like when you go there, record things, but they would just do it. Like really in the style of, we have done documentation before, all of a sudden I would get these videos where I have a person standing, now we are here at, and we're doing X, Y, Z. It's very sweet. But these videos just keep coming in, which is very nice. Just to show you a little bit of the process, those are pictures, I think they're really beautiful. Those are pictures that the Dao people took during the process of the construction of this house site. And here's a video, one of these videos that I just mentioned.
Nó mơ hai nước hai ở đâu sân đâu ít hơn lo gai nên nó mơ nước hot trong hũ ít hơn nên lo gai tên này hai nó hai này hot top này nó top.
So of course we have to say, of course we can now complain that the quality of this video is terrible, and probably the audio quality is also terrible, but at the end it's a piece of documentation, and it's better than no documentation. It's completely, I wasn't present in that moment, so people just said, oh yeah, that's what we want to show. And I think this is a very beautiful outcome of this. So some reflections on that. So as you can imagine, I mean, the story maybe sounded nice the way I told it, but that actually requires quite a bit from us as researchers. And I think one thing is allow for time in the field before we do these things. I think, as you could see on the timeline, it took a long time to kind of get to this point. And this next point here, you might want to throw a tomato at me, but I think one thing that I always try to do is like letting go a little bit of the academic pressures and really try to emphasize the goals that the communities had. And one thing to do, one way to do it is I've kind of like taking a step back on what we expect from our data collection and let data emerge and see what we can do with it actually. And this is, I think, I should have put this point at the last slide because for me, I think this is a very important point, is that we should remind ourselves that we can actually offer things that go beyond teaching literacy. And nothing against teaching literacy, this is amazing, and maybe that is something that some communities really want. But I think us as linguists, there's more things that we can offer. What are the overall benefits of this approach? So one thing that is really dear to me is kind of we can loosen a little bit the traditional main consultant relationship. So we do not have like 5 people who are, we still have these 5 people who are the really good language consultants. But beyond that, we have like almost our entire community that is somehow involved in it. And may it be people who say, you know, I want to be the person who's cooking or something like this. But since those are activities related to the project, they are also part of the project, whether they are doing elicitation or transcription, or like carrying a motor or piloting the boat or clearing a path. And similar to that, it kind of redefines this kind of service relationship that I think that we sometimes have, and these kind of projects even out a little bit more. Finally, it can of course increase the participation of the community by really targeting a problem that is dear or important to the community. And of course, it allows for interdisciplinary collaborations. In my case, of course, I collaborate with anthropologists and geographers. For the community, I have observed, and those are observations and partly like feedback that I got from the community. One thing is an increased self-esteem. And for those of you who don't know the regional context, like the Doe people and all the Navajo people are kind of on the very far end of the social hierarchy in town or in the region. But what happened now, due to this project, they kind of became famous in the region. So certain meetings for certain indigenous associations are now held in the Doe community. They are now hosting meetings, or recently they were invited to give advice to applicants for that kind of project that they won, which is really special for them. They have acquired very useful skills of navigating future projects themselves, and that starts from like opening a bank account, channeling money, and so on. And I think this is a way of guaranteeing maintenance and transmission kind of through the back door or through more unconventional ways. Because when people are going to the Situ Beleng and kept constructing these little houses and so on, they all of a sudden faced certain plant species that they haven't seen in a long time, or they did certain activities that they haven't done for a long time. So kind of indirectly are faced with their own linguistic and cultural heritage. For us as a researcher, I think it really facilitates long-term relationships with the community. And one thing that I really liked as an outcome, kind of a one hand washes another principle. So I still, of course, continue having to do some boring elicitation things, but I feel people now more like, oh, yeah, come on, I help you. I do that with you because you helped us, and I help you kind of in that way. And that felt, I felt better in doing these kind of activities with them. We have a continuous source of data, as you've seen, like these videos keep coming in. And from a linguistic point of view, we can expect some data surprises or things that we haven't expected before. And the drawbacks, of course, do I still have a minute? The drawbacks of such an approach, of course, it is an increased workload, because we have to interact with different agents, like local agents, especially when we needed to go into certain parts of the territory. You need a specific authorization, so we have to talk with other communities that are in these territories and so on. And we have to manage several projects, which is usually, it was my own project because I needed funding for doing these trips, plus helping the Doe people in navigating their project. And of course, one thing is an increased time commitment beyond the field time. So it's not, you go to the field and you are there immersed, you go back, and then you just work on your data. It goes on and on and on, right? People keep asking you and have questions, and you kind of have to be there to answer these questions. So it's a commitment, a different form of commitment, I would say. And one thing, and Kelsey and I, we talked a lot about that, I think can be harder to set boundaries, because if you, according to my experience, if you engage in a project that addresses a really serious problem for the communities, many times personal problems are tied to it and people come to you and want help. But of course, you cannot help with everything because you don't have the time or even the skills to navigate that. So that was personally a little bit hard for me to navigate this part. And to end, I think if we are strategic about these things, we can kind of hit many birds with the same stone. I've thought about the zwei Fliegen mit einer Klappe. By, of course, enlarging our empirical basis with unexpected data, and support maintenance of language and culture through more or less conventional ways. And I think in order to answer the question that is above this conference here, I think one thing we should do is like really asking ourselves, what can be the role of us as a linguist in these kind of project? What kind of, are there more hats that we can put on in order to reach the goal of maintaining and revitalizing these languages? So that's it. Thank you so much.